Yeah, so what I have now, I have three Yeats poems and then three um, Heaney poems. And they're short, so they're not as long. Um,
Well, I think
it's
this
short.
is actually a pretty good segue too to that first one, right? Because it's Innisfree.
Inisfree, yes, and it's a nice. This was the first poem I was going to read at the Prodigal bar because the start of it, "I shall arise and go now," is taken from the King James Bible
Oh, is it?
of the prodigal son.
Oh, yes, yes.
What the prodigal son says when he's returning to.
Right, right. Before he returns. Perfect.
Yeah,
We'll have to do that again. We will make sure to do that. This is pretty much though. I think this is certainly the first one I knew of Yeats, and I think I'm not alone in that. This is one of the most famous of his.
most famous poems written very early when he was a young man, written in 1888 when he was 23 or 24 years of age. 24 years of age. The Lake Isle of Innisfree. I will arise and go now, and go to Inisfree, and a small cabin build there, of clay and wattles made. 9 bean rows will I have there, a hive for the honey bee, and live alone in the bee-loud glade. And I shall have some peace there, for peace comes dropping slow, dropping from the vales of the morning to where the cricket sings. There midnight's all a glimmer, and noon a purple glow, and evening full of the linnet's wings. I will arise and go now, for always night and day I hear lake water lapping with low sounds by the shore, while I stand on the roadway or on the pavement's grey. I hear it in the deep heart's core. And the next poem was written during the War of Independence when he was in his tower, and he's looking out the window of his tower while the War of Independence is going about all around him. And it's the sixth poem in a very well-known collection of poems called Meditations in a Time of Civil War. The stars nest by my window. The bees build in the crevices of loosening masonry, and there the mother bird bring grubs and flies. My wall is loosening. Honey bees come build in the empty house of the stair. We are closed in, and the key is turned on our uncertainty. Somewhere a man is killed or a house burned, yet no clear fact to be discerned. Come build in the empty house of the stair. A barricade of wood or of stone. Some 14 days of civil war. Last night they trundled down the road, that dead young soldier in his blood. Come build in the empty house of the stair. We had fed the heart on fantasies. the heart's grown brutal from the fair, more substance in our enmities than in our love. Oh, honey bees, come build in the empty house of the stair. And the third poem I'm going to read is written on January 13th, 1939. He was on his deathbed when he wrote this. He had a dream about Cuchulainn, and he got up and he dictated the dream to his wife, and then from the notes he wrote this poem. Cuchulainn, for people who don't know, is an Irish hero, famous, very famous from the Ulster cycles, known for his capacity to rev up and take out armies from when he was a little boy. And this is Cuchulainn after he dies. Cuchulainn comforted. A man that had 6 mortal wounds, a man violent and famous, strode among the dead. Eyes stared out of the branches and were gone. Then certain shrouds that muttered head to head came and were gone. He leant upon a tree as though to meditate on wounds and blood. A shroud that seemed to have authority among those bird-like things came and let fall a bundle of linen. Shrouds by 2 and 3 came creeping up because the man was still. And thereupon that linen carrier said, "Your life can grow much sweeter if you will. Obey our ancient rule and make a shroud. Mainly because of what we only know. The rattle of those arms makes us afraid. We thread the needle's eyes, and all we do, all must do together." That done, the man took up the nearest and began to sew. Now must we sing, and sing the best we can. But first you must be told our character. Convicted cowards all, by kindred slain, or driven from home and left to die in fear. They sang, but had nor human tunes nor words, though all was done in common as before. They had changed their throats and had the throats of birds.
I find this one to be one of the more difficult ones, or I'm having troubles understanding. Exactly.
So let me see, those 3 poems, as I say, Inisfree was written when he was young. It's a poem which obviously speaks to the divine in nature.
Right.
The yearning for a spiritual communion with nature. It's another spiritual journey poem. It's what the Irish would have called a pilgrimage poem. Pilgrimage.
Right. Yep.
pilgrimages to islands and building of islands and the building of hermitages on islands would have been very common among the ancient Irish early Christians and saints. So it's that notion, that yearning to be a hermit, to go inward, to escape from modern technology. No Zoom poetry readings on Inisfree.
No Zoom.
The Hermit's Quest. The longing for essential spiritual truths and the finding of them in nature. So it's a nice poem to contrast with Sailing to Byzantium.
Mm-hmm. Right. I didn't know that. It seems like a lot of Yeats is about traveling to someplace where he feels his soul to be, where he feels his soul to be, where he feels more integrated.
Yeah, where he feels where his soul will become more integrated. Yes, I think
right.
That's
right. Whether that be going to Inisfree or whether that be going to Byzantium.
Yeah. Star's Nest at My Window. Star's Nest at My Window was a poem that he wrote shortly before he got the Nobel Prize. Yeats got the Nobel Prize in 1925, I think. And when Heaney got the Nobel Prize 70 years later in 1995, and he read this poem at his Nobel acceptance speech, and he commented on it, and his comments were that it's a poem which tells us that massacre will happen again, but also credits as a reality the squeeze of the hand, the actuality of sympathy, and the protectiveness between living creatures. And it satisfies the contradictory needs which consciousness experiences at times of extreme crisis. The need, on the one hand, for a truth-telling that will be hard and retributive, and on the other hand, the need not to harden the mind to a point where it denies its own yearnings for sweetness and trust.
Mm-hmm. And that's pretty much that last stanza then of
and Yeats had said pretty much the same thing. He's sitting in his tower at the time, 1922. Ireland has been given its independence. As soon as it's given its independence, two factions go head to head, brother against brother. He's sitting watching this, helpless. The lines more enmity, more passion in our enmity than in our love. He begins to wonder if some of his early poetry, or he begins to take responsibility and to feel a sense of guilt about his early poetry sending out, and his early plays sending out some of the rebels.
Oh, okay.
It's now been created. And what he wrote about the writing of this poem is that he felt an overmastering desire not to grow unhappy or embittered, and not to lose all sense of the beauty of nature. And he uses the honeybee, which is a it's an archetypal image of harmony and regeneration.
Mm-hmm.
And he finishes up his tribute to Yeats. Heaney's Nobel acceptance speech was titled "Crediting Poetry." Then in his final lines, he asks, "What credit do we give to poetry? What is the power of poetry?" And he says, "It is the power to persuade that vulnerable part of our consciousness of its rightness, in spite of the evidence of wrongness all around it.
Mm-hmm.
The power to remind us that we are all hunters and gatherers of values, that our very solitudes and distresses are beneficial insofar as they too are an earnest of our veritable human being." And that's the poem that he picks to do that. Now, the one you were having trouble with was the last one, Cuchulainn Comforted.
Yeah. At first I thought I got it. But, you know, it's something about, I mean, because it's Cuchulainn, who, I mean, frankly, is kind of like an insanely brave person. I mean, you're talking about, what's the story where he was like 9 years old and beat up everybody in his school?
Yeah, beat up all the guys in the hurling team and took them on and beat them all, and then
the hurling team, and he beat every one of them, even though he was the youngest. Yeah. You know, so to say that, but first you must be told our character, convicted cowards all, by kindred slain, or driven from home and left to die in fear. They sang, but had no human tunes, nor words. And, you know, the whole thing that then they had changed their throats because they had become birds. So it kind of puts them literally on a loftier level. So
the poem is written in terza rima. Three lines, rhyming first 1, 3, 2, 4, on and on. Which the first time and only time Yeats used it in the whole corpus of his work.
Really?
Yep. And terza rima, and it was 2 weeks before he died. He's on his deathbed. So who does he invoke to write his death poem? Dante.
Right. And I was going to say, terza rima is the Divine Comedy.
Dante's Purgatoria. And what happens in Dante's Purgatoria? You're brought down to people whose egos were the opposite of your own. You meet your opposite, and the two blend together and make sweet music, make sweet song. He's dramatizing his death. He's envisaging himself as the poetic Cuchulainn, which I think many people would credit him with his courage. I mean, there's a little piece just been done, commissioned by the Abbey Theatre. The Abbey Theatre commissioned 50 writers to write pieces for the COVID-19 people locked up in their homes.
Oh, really?
And then gave actors to read, and then published the whole thing, 12 hours of these little 10-minute reflections from inside the confinement of the COVID-19 situation. And Ed O'Brien, the writer, wrote a piece on Yeats, and she wrote it about his response to the outcry about Synge's play, The Playboy of the Western World, which was shown in the Abbey, and everybody went berserk about it. It exposed the primitive nature of the Irish psyche, how it was still very pantheistic, still believed in the old gods, and it showed that at core it was very different. It was very alienated from Roman Catholicism, and there was an outcry about it. And the three directors sing it, so they arranged to have somebody had to stand up and talk to the masses about the play to defend it. And there was Yeats, Lady Gregory, and Synge were the three participants. Synge got sick and took to his bed. Lady Gregory got on a train and went back to the west of Ireland to the Kilpark estate. And Yeats went out single-handedly and addressed the mob and told them, "You should be ashamed of yourselves."
Lady Gregory helped him found it, didn't she?
She was the founder, wrote some of the. But he was the one who stood up when the whole moment of the theatre was on the line, whether it was going to survive or not. He stood up to the crowd and he said, "Catch yourselves on," you know. So Yeats earned the right to consider himself the Cuchulainn of the Anglo-Irish Irish literature and poetry, and so when he goes into purgatory, he's paired up with cowards, and it's about the dissolution, in the spiritual journey that he's been on throughout these last 3 or 4 poems that I've read. The spiritual journey ends with the death of the ego.
Oh, okay. So what are they knitting? Okay, so then my understanding, so he's Cuchulainn and or Cuchulainn.
In my interpretation of it, now it could be interpreted. This is certainly not any absolute interpretation.
Well, right, but he's talking like a third person narration. A man that had 6 mortal wounds. That's Cuchulainn. Yeah. After his last battle.
That's it. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Where I think he got totally duped by somebody.
Yeah.
So, rough way to go. So he's with his mortal wounds, striding among the dead, and comes upon these people knitting a shroud and says he has to knit a shroud. So is almost the whole act of knitting that, interweaving threads, kind of that part of another metaphor for integration.
Yes, and I think there's it is easier for a camel to enter through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter heaven. I think there's that involved in it as well. That
right, because we thread the needle's eye. It's all, and all we do, all must do together.
So I think there's a surrendering of the heroic ego, which he's speaking to, which is the final part of his spiritual integration, and the knitting together. Every brave person always has a cowardly alter ego. Braveness and courage go hand in hand. So people who are always fighting are always cowards. People who are always provoking. Fights are always cowards. So there's always the two together, and what you're finally seeing is a coming together of the two.
Thank you very much.
I don't know if that
I
helps.
always love that ending. They had changed their throats and had the throats of birds.
And he saw the spirit as he saw as the same in Byzantium, where he becomes the golden bird upon the tree.
Oh, geez. I didn't even think of that.
There's always that image of the songbird, you know,
Right.
as the poet. It's like
Well, that's the stare too.
Yeah, it's like
the stare's nest.
Keats's Nightingale, you know. When Keats is fantasizing about death, it's the nightingale that he's longing to join, you know. So I think that fantasy among poets to become part of the bird's song is the ultimate of the art, you know.
Definitely. I mean, I think most poets would agree that, or even composers. I mean, Messiaen, all he did was try to translate bird song into music.